Representative Tokuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Ms. Rapp-Hooper, let's be clear here. There needs to be no ambiguity that Taiwan is not a bargaining chip for trade. 100%. I agree with you. Congress needs to take decisive action to disavow this notion that somehow they are on the negotiating table. So I have some very quick questions that I'd like you to address here. I want to do all those resos, pass all those affirmations, but one, what happens if we do nothing before those talks in April? Two, when those talks happen, if we have failed to do anything, what key signals should we be looking for? What should we be concerned about in terms of the verbiage, the language, the decisions coming out of it? And three, as it relates to Taiwan, what would be the best possible outcome from these negotiations? What do we need to push for in terms of what comes out of these trade talks as it relates to the security and the sovereignty of Taiwan?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the very comprehensive questions. I'll do my very best to answer them quickly. To your question, what happens if Congress does not act to reaffirm the essential elements of American Taiwan policy? The concern would be that whether a deliberate concession is made or not, Xi Jinping, Beijing will represent that some kind of concession or change has been made. That the failure to reaffirm wholeheartedly and in a detailed manner all of these elements of Taiwan policy may leave the space for the Chinese side to interpret that there has been some change, and to publicize that not only in Taipei, but in other American allied capitals. To your question, what would happen then? That could potentially erode the credibility of American commitments, not only to Taiwan, but in other allied capitals. A perception that the United States was willing to change its policy, even if it had not made deliberate concessions, even if these were simply misinterpretations or relitigations by the CCP, could substantially damage American credibility in allied capitals around the world. What would be the key signals that we would be looking for? We would be looking for, I think most likely, statements from the Chinese government through Chinese official media or other sources after a meeting that there had been some kind of change, some kind of concession or some kind of understanding reached between the United States and China. The Chinese government might try to represent that there was some sort of so-called G2 arrangement, a great power condominium. This is a phrase that our allies around the world really fear because it implies that the United States and China are making arrangements without other allies present that may fundamentally affect their fates. And that type of verbiage would lead to the erosion of credibility that I discuss here. And finally, what is the best possible outcome? The best possible outcome is the continuation of the status quo with intense focus by this committee and this Congress to increasing its support for Taiwan in the months and years ahead. A reaffirmation of the policy that Congress has helped to keep steady since 1979, an understanding in Beijing and around the world that that policy has not changed, and a continued commitment by this committee and by the Congress as a whole to continuing to support Taiwan's security by way of arms sales, other defense activities, like all of those activities that were enumerated from the NDAA, yes, support for important measures like the Porcupine Act, and as we've suggested in all of our testimony, a redoubled focus on what the United States can better do to support Taiwan in the face of the PRC's growing gray zone coercion. So what I would like to see, and I think what we would all like to see, is Congress being able to keep us on this track that you've helped
definitely, Mr. Chair, hopefully we can work on some kind of resolution to really affirm our position. Thank you for that answer. Not sure if I can get an answer to this, but I did want to mention the fact, or ask the question, if we are actually prepared for the kind of hybrid campaign or war without harm that China is already conducting. As Ms. Kam noted, China doesn't differentiate between peacetime or wartime. They're in a constant state of focusing on reunification. And I feel like we're playing checkers and they're 3D chessing us, because our approach to Taiwan is a kinetic war situation, defense spend. China's leveraging Taiwan and our other allies economically based upon the tariffs that we have now imposed upon them. We're losing the disinformation war, I feel like, with China, because we're literally feeding them the words from our leaders. As was noted here, the downgrading of the Indo-Pacific and the NDS, the not mentioning Taiwan or the TRA, this is feeding into that disinformation campaign that they launched. And China is now gaining influence and power on the global stage because we've abdicated our role and removed ourselves from 65 international organizations, and that's going to allow them to shape the narrative around Taiwan. It's going to literally manipulate international law and international institutions to further isolate Taiwan. So given that we're still just focused on the kinetic war, what is the one or two other areas that we absolutely have to be refocused on to win this hybrid war with China that's already ongoing?
There's a lot of talk about deterrence, and also resilience. But we don't really, it's a term that's thrown around a lot. But there are actually a lot of ways where the United States can work with Taiwan, cooperate on both deterrence as well as resilience. As Ukraine has shown, it cannot simply be a military defense. It must be a whole of society defense with resilience. And there's a lot of things that Taiwan as well as the United States can learn from Ukraine. Ukraine offers a lesson. And I would just point out that Ukraine is transforming its defense industry. If Ukraine can do it, why can't Taiwan? And there are lots of ways where the United States can help in terms of innovation, industry, for Taiwan's defense industry. The second thing that we can also impart is, as we have also learned very clearly as an example, so that it's not just abstract, is the importance of leadership with President Zelensky in Taiwan, in the Ukraine. And so that's another way that we can express and cooperate with Taiwan in terms of continuity of government, continuity of operations, command and control in times of not only war, but also in times of crises. And those crises will happen. So I would just urge, as we see here in the U.S. Congress, that in the State of the Union, every leader, every official in 3 branches of the government is here in the Congress except for one. There's always one secretary who's kept away. And I would also urge this attention to decapitation, the threat of decapitation in Taiwan, and that in Taiwan, the president and the vice president should never appear in the same place. And that's another area we can work with them on. Thank you.